Brilliant. So welcome to our webinar this evening. We are talking about how to support autistic adults through the unmasking process, and Eoin is here to talk about it with me this evening. I'm Evaleen, founder of Awesome Training. Eoin, do you want to give us a little intro to yourself?
Hi, I'm Eoin, and I'm a therapist for many years. I've known I'm autistic for 10 years. I've also done a lot of training in the area of therapy, and currently I'm involved on the Dawn Practitioner Certificate course with Awesome. We've had a couple of runs of it, training therapists to work with autistic adults. So we're going to talk about a particular aspect of that in this chat.
Absolutely. Our newly named Dawn. We're calling it the practitioner course, and then we just ask people, we love the idea of light, new beginnings,
New day.
New day, all of that. It just, I think, really captures what the course is about, and we'll be running it for the third time now in October. So oh, and I suppose it would be good to maybe talk about like what masking is before we start talk about unmasking. And I suppose it's just,
It occurred to me also just to quickly say that, you know, we do have therapists in mind and therapist training in mind in talking this evening, but unmasking obviously is a process that therapists learn to help clients with. The clients have to do the unmasking. So anyone who's here in any other capacity hopefully might get some interesting ideas just about the whole unmasking process. Plus, while with friends or family who discover they're autistic and face the question of masking and unmasking, again, we're not going to be in a therapist role to them, but we can still be great support to them. So again, some of the things we're talking about this evening can be helpful for anyone who just is supporting someone else in this process. But yeah, before we talk about unmasking, we should talk about masking, don't we? By the way, I think, give a plug for the new book by Amy Pearson and Kieran Rose. I'm only about a third of the way through it so far myself, and unsurprisingly, it's what I expect it to be, which is a major contribution to the literature. It's called Unmasking Autism. And also, for anyone who knows Kieran, at least, I don't know Amy, but I've listened to Kieran. For anyone who knows Kieran, it's also you want to be wide awake when you're reading it, because it's going to take all your brain power. They don't pull any punches. So, but I think it's going to be a very, very important book. Yeah. So that's I think, going to be the current word on unmasking, this subject we're talking about tonight. Yeah. Masking and autism, I think actually it's called, not unmasking, it's called masking and autism.
Autistic masking.
Masking, yeah, I think unmasking autism is Devon Price, isn't it? So it's our autism and masking. Gosh, I should have it here somewhere.
It's autistic masking.
Autistic masking. There you are. There you go now.
Understanding identity management and the role of stigma. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So just a plug there for that. Well-deserved plug for what show looks like being a great book. Yeah. But masking is it's such an important issue in general in relation to being autistic and discovering you're autistic, or indeed in relation to any other kind of neurodivergence. And it's a very important issue for therapists who nowadays are working with more and more autistic adults. The thing is, what I'm about to say may not be true in a generation if we're lucky, but right now, the majority of autistic adults are late discovery autistic adults, as in the ones who know they're autistic have discovered it late, and the majority of late discovery autistic adults are masked late discovery autistic adults because they haven't known they were autistic. They knew they were different at some level. They found life extra difficult, felt they didn't fit in, and have masked, camouflaged, mimicked, turned themselves inside out, bent over backwards, created a false identity, all the million ways that we can talk about this. And that's crucial. It'd be fantastic if it's not true in the future, but at the moment, we're not just dealing with, what is it to be autistic? It's what is it to be autistic and have mostly hidden that and bent it out of shape, So that's crucial. Would you like to say a little bit more about, maybe how you see masking, and then I might add to a bit and we can segue our way into unmasking.
Sure. And that's the thing, I think it's so open to interpretation. People have lots of different ways of describing it. I think by and large, though, it's kind of described like a behavior, like, you know, fitting in or doing the things that you do. Whereas I suppose, you know me, Eoin, I like to talk about emotions. It's like, with that, you know, for me, it's about that. It's about like what has happened to us during our lives that made us feel unsafe, made us feel a certain way. And then the strategies and the behavior, let's say, or the things that we do kind of come secondary to, or as a result of those feelings. And for many of us as adults, you know, it's trauma. It's literally those kind of trapped emotions that we've never dealt with, that were too hard to deal with at the time. You know, and I suppose it's actually like just being, you know, realizing that like it's not your fault. I suppose I kind of, you know, sorry, I've skipped ahead to masking. But you know, masking is, I suppose it's where you just protect yourself. I mean, I know years ago I forgot about it, actually. I called it fortressing on my own journey. In the first few years I was like, actually fortressing is really how it feels for me, because it feels like I've done something very physical inside, like put up these barriers to kind of protect myself. And that's actually what I felt in this kind of like fortress upon fortress. And in behind all these fortresses was like the real me, let's say, that person that was just couldn't really take much more hurt on, you know. And yeah, and that's, I think that's what it felt like for me. And I suppose that's, yeah, and then everything else kind of comes after that, the mimicking and the, you know, because you get hurt and you're like, well, what will I do now? Because I don't want to experience that ever again. And yeah, you start changing yourself then, don't you, gradually?
Yeah, and you know, everybody, every human being is trying to get certain needs met as their life goes by, and they want to feel, as you said, reasonably safe in the world. They want a certain amount of love and validation and feeling they're important to people. We want a certain amount of success and, you know, achievement in our lives and contribution. And all of those things become a puzzle and a battle for autistic people growing up, particularly not knowing they're autistic. In other words, the initial attempts to get people to like you don't work because you're treated as weird or rude or something like that. So you have to try a different method, but it's not your natural method. So it's not really going to work either. So you're caught in between when it comes to any of these things, love or safety or achievement or, you know, anything like that. We end up caught in between and getting, you know, the worst of both worlds.
Yes, and that's one thing I was watching, actually, Kieran and Amy talking about their book, and it was like, you know, that we think we're masking, we think we're doing a great job, but yet we're still being called quirky and getting these kind of comments. So it's like, well, really, we're not. And it is. I mean, if we're not communicating in our authentic way, if we're not being confident in ourselves, we're coming across as fake, really, to people. You know what I mean? There's a lot going on, I suppose, and like, so some of it is conscious, and some of it then is like subconscious or unconscious, you know what I mean?
Huge amounts of it, huge amounts of it. I mean, I think that's, you know, again, just teasing out the masking process a little bit, it's interesting to think of it. And, you know, when you're also, as I'll come back to, when you're helping somebody, you know, explore it and then do some choices, maybe consider choices around unmasking. It's interesting, I think, to look at it in terms of childhood, you know, primary school sort of age, adolescence, secondary school roughly, and then early adulthood. I mean, by the time you get into mid-adulthood, you know, a lot of the masking is fairly set. But you know, particularly in childhood, it's largely unconscious. It's just automatic reactions to getting people to like you if you can, or at least a bit more than you feel they like you currently, or trying not to annoy people and get in trouble and all that stuff. And you're not thinking of it in terms of anything particular. You're just living your child's life, you know. I think it becomes a bit more conscious in adolescence, because a lot of things become a bit more conscious and, in fact, self-conscious in adolescence. So I think, you know, for instance, when we're exploring this with people, when we're saying, well, let's look back on the masking process, adolescence is an interesting place to start sometimes, because often people can remember consciously masking as a teen, you know, deciding, I better pretend I like that music, and like, I better try and get to like that music because that's the cool music. I don't like it. I like classical music, but I better not say too much about that, you know, and so on and so on. You know, I better mimic those people because they're cool people. Now, there's lots of that goes on for adolescents anyway, but not at the depth. It's not as bent out of shape as it is for somebody who's autistic. And we can be very untrue to ourselves. You see, that's the other bit you were saying. It's not just about external behavior. And as you said, it's not just about behavior. I mean, in fact, there's an interesting kind of 5 categories that are sometimes used in therapy, which is emotion, behavior, environment, cognition, and physiology. You know, those kind of 5 areas of any aspect of our lives. And so you could say that we mask behaviorally, as in we stop doing something that people think is odd, like you know, a particular special interest, like, you know, still loving Lego as an adult, as you know, Pete Hornby talks about. We mask emotions and repress them. We will alter our environment. We will go to football stadiums even though we hate our pubs, even though we might hate it, you know. We'll change our thinking, you know, we'll convince ourselves we like things, you know, and I found this personally even a huge piece. I'll come back to it as an example, you know, with the unmasking. It's like trying to figure out what's real about me, you know, like what did I convince myself I like, what do I actually like? What music do I like? What sort do I like? What hobbies do I like? Who do I like? Do I know, you know? So there's the cognitive, and then finally there's physical. Now this is an area that actually I'm less familiar with, if you like, professionally, but I noticed that it's something that they're writing about a good bit in the book, is the way in which we physiologically alter ourselves. We repress stimming, of course, but also we just, you know, they're emphasizing a little bit in the book so far in what I've read. They're emphasizing this kind of active view of you know, of masking. In other words, that we'll change our very body language, you know, in a way that isn't really us.
Yeah.
So I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, I mean, stimming it, like it's an example, and also putting up with discomfort, you know, because people talk about masking, and
that's
it's like,
another example. Yeah,
actually to be in physical pain, whether that's because the sensory environment, physical environment is too
or
much,
exhaustion,
or exhausting, or you actually are in pain because you've got a medical condition, but you know, people are telling you you're exaggerating and you're always complaining, so you just shut up about that too. So there's just so many layers there to it. There is, you know, and also I don't think people kind of maybe talk enough about this internal struggle that goes on, because there's the kind of like, you know, these different kind of parts of you, the part that's like, you know, this isn't you shouldn't be doing, because there's always that little voice, isn't there, kind of, which is real us. You know?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And then you're kind of just doing things that you know you don't really want to do. And then there's all these trauma responses, like I talk about like PDA and stuff like that. It's like demand avoidance, but it's internal, and I'm a people pleaser. So it's like, now I don't want to do the thing, but I'll do the thing. Oh, like, no wonder we're exhausted, Owen. Like, no wonder. Do you know what I mean? Like, when someone said to me recently, do you know, other people just like do the thing? And I'm like, imagine they just do it. There isn't all this like thinking and feeling and processing.
Well, yeah, the way I've started describing it recently is like we're trying to live 2 lives for every one that everyone else is living, you know. We're doing it all double, you know. I don't know if you've heard me use this analogy before, but there's a phrase used in ballroom dancing, which is that the woman does everything the man does, but backwards and wearing high heels.
Oh yeah.
Have you come across that one?
No,
it's like that. So that's one of my analogies now for the masking process, is we do everything that the neurotypicals do, but backwards while wearing high heels. Yeah. That's how hard it is, you know.
That's something like Mackie would always talk about. It's like, you know, we're balancing on a chair on the edge of something, trying to keep, you know, something.
Exactly.
That is literally, you know, this idea of like living carefully, and how much thought goes into everything, and has to, and it, you know, because we're protecting ourselves and we're assessing risk all of the time. And you know, that's something I wrote about recently, was like, you know, people just ask for help, like it's this simple thing. Like, you have to evaluate the risk that's involved for you. How are you going to feel if you're shamed again, or, you know, there's just so much there that people don't really realize, because I suppose you wouldn't unless you're listening to autistic experiences, you know, every day. And you know, yeah, it's I mean, look, people, it's all trauma responses, really. I mean, as you were saying, when you're a kid, you just do these things naturally. They're kind of just like protective naturally, but that's, you know, all trauma responses, and they're so ingrained then by the time we get to whatever adulthood, you know, people pleasing behaviors,
Yeah, and you know,
all
yeah.
of it. Yeah.
The other phrase that Karen and Amy use is stigma management. You know, in other words, you know, we're trying to avoid being stigmatized, and that's not the stigma of being autistic, because we don't know we're autistic growing up. Not that that would necessarily always help, because that's stigmatized as well. But being nerdy is stigmatized, and being not interested in what everyone else is stigmatized, and being very straight and blunt is stigmatized, and you know, being sensitive and gentle is stigmatized, and finding, you know, things sensory overwhelming that other people don't is stigmatized. And yeah, it's just, you know, nobody likes being treated as odd, wrong, weird, stupid, excluded, any of that stuff, you know. Now, just, you know, before we move on to you know, towards the kind of, you know, discovery you're autistic as an adult and facing into unmasking questions, I think there's a couple of other things to say about masking. One is, we don't know how many, possibly very few, but there are a few. I've met just a few so far. There are people who are autistic, don't know it until they're adults, but didn't actually have to mask very much. They were lucky, you know, their family, their immediate, you know, the school teachers they met, whoever, at least most of them, led them to be able to largely be themselves. And so, you know, I just want to acknowledge that, you know, because I like to be accurate, and to you know we're dealing with. But it requires that. It requires a lot of luck, you know, in the environment you grow up in. And it requires a lot of luck along quite a period of time, because you need that luck to hold from family to primary to secondary into the world of work, find a niche that suits you in the world of work, find friends that suit you as an adult, and ideally, if you want a partner and a family, find a partner that suits you. But there does seem to be occasionally we meet people who do seem to be largely that lucky, but mostly not. You know, as you said, largely this is an issue of horror and trauma and loneliness and massive effort. And that what I'm leading up to here is, you know, self-hatred, shame, imposter syndrome, low self-esteem, and of course, autistic burnout. So the kind of story we meet then in adulthood and meet as therapists again is this picture, you know, of somebody who has realized they're autistic, perhaps got an assessment and a diagnosis, perhaps not, perhaps self-identified, but they're confused about who they are, not sure if they're in the right environment and niche in their life or with the right people, and exhausted and burnt out.
That's it. If we're trying to do what everyone else wants us to do and go along with everything, we don't know who we are. We're just, of course, you're going to end up doing something you don't really want to be doing. You know what I mean? Surrounded by people you might not want to be with. That happens to lots of people. You know, I find. And then some of us aren't. You know, we're kind of happy with our lot, how we got here. And I think that's where intersectionality comes in. Like, all of our experiences are different, you know, and it totally depends on numerous factors. And I always think, you know, people just mask in different ways, depending on what they've been through. And like, I suppose this is the thing, it's that, like, this is so new for therapists. Like, this territory is kind of uncharted, really, isn't it? You know,
yeah, it is. Yeah. And, you know, one of the aspects of that uncharted territory and the sense of, there's just simply a lot of catch up to be done, is that, as far as I can see in the, you know, training we've done so far and training I've done so far, you know, with therapists, is that, and these are the people who are looking to learn. So I don't know what it's like out in the rest of the world. I've seen bits of research around it. They're a bit mixed reading, but basically there's a lot of confusion between what it is to just be autistic and what it is to be traumatized and masked and basically highly confused and anxious and with terribly low self-esteem. And those things are all mixed up together. Like you talk about the autism pot, you know, they're all mixed up together in a lot of people's minds, including the minds of a lot of therapists, you know, like a lot of therapists and a lot of clinicians, a lot of psychiatrists and so on still think that anxiety is a symptom of autism, you know, whereas there's no reason for an autistic person to be any more anxious than anyone else. Anxiety is part of life, but there's no reason to be more anxious than anyone else, except because of the picture we've just described. Of course, you know,
What?
of course
You
you're
mean
anxious.
it's not because the bright lights, Owen? I'm not, it's like bright lights and noises might hurt us. They can't really affect our self-esteem now, can they?
No. Good. That's a good quote. I like that one. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of confusion there, I think. And so first of all, we need to tease that out and learn about it. And we then may need to help a client. If we're a therapist with a recently discovered autistic person, we may need to help them tease that out further. You know, what does it mean to be autistic by its own nature, and you know, the fact that we have an intensity of interest and high sensitivity and you know, different sort of social motivations than non-autistic people, but none of those are problematic or otherwise, and technically they're neutral, you know, they're just ways of being, you know. And what most autistic clients are bringing, which is a whole lot of this stuff, yeah, you know, really messy stuff.
And that's it. And I suppose, like, unless a therapist is kind of has heard of neurodiversity and is they're not going to recognize as well their client who's coming in depressed or suicidal or anxiety or out of work, you know what I mean, burnt out. Basically, they may not recognize this as an autistic person. You know, I think that was like from our last course. Someone commented in the feedback or a survey, and honestly was like, you know, just even over the course of the course, the 6 months, you know, they had identified, 3 clients who wouldn't have known were autistic. You know, the therapist or the clients wouldn't have known they were autistic before that. You know, and when I say identified, I mean recognized, and then they went for, obviously, a diagnosis or whatever. But like, that's huge. That means that you have a very different understanding than of the person who's in front of you, don't you? You know, you kind of see the lifetime of trauma that's been there.
Well, you know, I suppose this is maybe the point that, you know, might kind of then, you know, lead us a bit more into working with this and working with the unmasking process, which is part of the recovery process. Nobody needs to recover from being autistic, but they do need to recover from a lifetime of trying to mask. The point is that a number of clients who, you know, make the discovery as an adult that they're autistic and then come to a therapist. And I'm talking from my experience, but also what many other therapists have said to me. I supervise various other therapists and many of the therapists on our courses and so on, that what clients say, if they've been in therapy before they discovered, and now they're coming to therapy again, maybe the same therapist, maybe a different therapist, they'll say something along the lines of, an awful lot was got wrong in my previous therapy. And I'm not necessarily blaming the therapist, because I didn't know myself I was autistic, but we were looking down the wrong tracks, and we were misnaming things, and we were misinterpreting things, and we were interpreting, you know, my tendency to not have many friends as some sort of avoidance and social anxiety, whereas most of it actually is just, I'm happy with a couple of friends, as long as they're the right friends, and that's it, perfectly happy. That's the track I'm going down, which is bringing us into, this is partly what unmasking is about thinking, well, this is actually who I am now. I need to find a way to be it, and how's that going to affect my life, and are there tough choices here? But that sense in which, if you don't know somebody's autistic and they don't know they're autistic, and you're trying to understand them as a neurotypical person, then you're going to get a lot of stuff wrong, and you're going to misexplain and wrongly explain a lot of things. And, you know, as therapists, I've also heard people say, and I've said it myself, oh gosh, when I think back, a bit like you've been saying recently about some of your work, you know, when I look back and think of some people that I worked with, and they were probably autistic, and okay, I didn't know it, but then they didn't know it, so how would I have known it? But still, it feels bad. You kind of feel like, oh, I think I was on the wrong track there. If we'd known they were autistic, maybe we would have worked very differently, you know. And occasionally I have those people come back to me. You know, I've had people who I worked with a long time, and we've discovered they're autistic, and yeah, we start working differently. You know, it hasn't been all wrong, but some stuff we just say, hold on, we don't need to do that at all, treat it that way at all. We can shift into, that's fine, let's not even worry about that, and we'll work on this, you know.
And that's it. It's just that reframe a lot of the time, isn't it? Just to
different operating system, as we say. Oh, that's not even a glitch then. That's a feature, as they say, you know, it's not a bug, it's a feature, you know.
It's on the brochure.
That's exactly, you know. So yeah, I suppose that brings us then to, you know, like the sort of proof of the pudding, the meat is in the unmasking, you know, and this is what we want to help people with, you know. Unmasking, by the way, doesn't mean telling people you're autistic. We often call that coming out, in the same way as, you know, parallel to sexual orientation, you know, and that can be part of the process of being true to yourself, is, you know, telling some people in your life that you're autistic and see how they take it. That's a whole tough piece in itself. But unmasking is, yeah, it can involve that, and it can involve what follows on from that. In other words, I'm autistic, therefore, when you think I'm being blunt, I'm probably just being enthusiastic and straight, you know, so hopefully you can understand that. Or, you know, I'm autistic, therefore, to be honest, you know, I'm trying to be more true to myself. And so, you know, if sometimes I sort of go home early, you know, from social occasions, please understand, you know, so the two can link, but the telling people you're autistic isn't unmasking in itself. That's much more complex, because it involves our relationships and, you know, the picture people may have of us and the fact that a lot of it isn't accurate, but it also crucially involves this is the other piece that Kieran and Amy are really focusing on in their book so far, is that it's identity confusion. It's not just that other people don't know who you are, you don't know who you are. And to me, that's an enormous piece in therapy, because therapy is very much about real self, you know, and becoming true to yourself. So this is in that way, we can make it a little familiar to therapists, because people can be out of touch with who they are for other reasons than growing up neurodivergent and not knowing it. And so that's a piece I think that therapists can kind of get a hook on then, if they're thinking, well, my work here is to try and help this person find their true self. Then I think that's what unmasking really is. Now, there's pieces to that are not necessarily quick. This is where I throw in my own example, not too serious a one, but I've mentioned it before. When I discovered I was autistic and started going through some of this process myself, partly in therapy, partly just in my own head, you know, I realized I'd loads of doubt and very little trust in what music I liked. I thought, I don't know whether, it's not that I don't know what music I like, I thought, I don't know whether I know what music I like, you know? Maybe I do know what music I like. Maybe it's everything I think I like, and I said I liked, and maybe none of it is, you know? It was a very strange experience and went on for a couple of years, you know? The answer, by the way, was most of it, but not all of it. Yeah, there were some bits I thought, no, I don't really like that. Well, I just got into that because I thought you were supposed to, you know? But I did rebalance the amount of time I spend listening to certain kinds of music, for instance. But yeah, it was a strange feeling. I thought, I don't know what's real, you know. Now there are much more serious versions of that than my musical tastes, you know. Like, do I really like being a teacher? You know, do I really love this person? You know, all sorts of stuff. And now, don't panic. You know, lots of it just settles down. But on the other hand, sometimes we are in the wrong relationship with the wrong career, you know, and that's pretty serious thing to face. Obviously, like, again, you don't have to be autistic to face it, but it's possible that, yeah, we are thinking, I don't know how much of this is what I really am and really want and really need, you know. So big question sometimes.
Yeah, there can be a lot of upheaval, I suppose, is probably, you know,
potentially.
Yeah, potentially, yeah.
A lot of inner upheaval and potentially a chunk of outer upheaval.
Yeah, because I mean, I know for me and music, I was like nodding along, going, "Yep." But you know, there was that kind of, oh my, what if I'd known earlier? What my life? And I spent a bit of time thinking about that. But for me, I was actually like, but all these things are, and I try not to do regrets, you know, have led me to this place where actually I'm okay. And that, you know, for me, it was that story, you know, that I was in a good place, in a nice relationship, nice family, you know, so it was okay. It doesn't work out that way for everybody else, but there was other things in it I need to change. But I suppose, yeah, there's just so much there to unravel, which I did a series or an episode with Alice Doyle recently,
Oh,
You
yeah.
know,
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that was great.
talks about her unraveling process, and I actually really like that term. And actually, that's what it feels like. You're kind of unraveling. You know, you're kind of finding these new parts of you on that journey.
Hmm.
So
And
what? Yeah, what?
I have a quote here from myself. It's from just one of the slides I use in training around this stuff, and it's just pulls together some thoughts. Just saying what I see unmasking as. It's about being your real self and loving your real self, having your real friends, your real interests, your real opinions, your real goals, and so on, and about making aspects of yourself or sort of about giving aspects of yourself their rightful central role in your life and personality instead of treating them as peripheral and optional and shameful, you know? In other words, inviting in the pieces that are really you into the center of you. And if there are bits that aren't really you, because this is the other point that I think is important to make here, is that there's no pressure to unmask. You know, there shouldn't have been pressure to mask ideally, but there's no pressure to unmask. Like in the end of it all, we all mask a bit, like in a job interview or something, you know? And so this is about choice. It's about making some things more central and maybe other things a bit more peripheral, but you might still hang on to them. In fact, sometimes people even say, you know, I absolutely hate networking, you know, at work, but it's kind of handy that I learned to do it. So I'll use it now and then, you know, sure, it's a skill I have now, even though I hate it and it exhausts me, you know, it's like, sure, I was forced to learn it and now I have it. So it's about just making choices over time. This process takes time, so that the balance of what's really you, and you don't have to put that extra effort into, is much bigger, and the balance of bits that are over adapted and take too much effort and are too incongruent to who you are only a small part of your life. So it's a subtle enough process, you know, and that's why come and do our course, of course, is because, you know, there's plenty to this. It's as these processes are, it's subtle and potentially complex and takes time and support and validation and celebration, you know, because you know, people need encouragement with this process.
Huge encouragement. I think that's it, to feel safe and to feel like it's okay to be you, because the world has told us it's not okay to be you. So that therapist has a really, you know, that job of actually saying it is okay to be you and trying to counteract like literally all those other experiences. And like, would you notice then, Owen, say with your clients that like, you know, confidence is such an issue for so many of us. Like, obviously, how can you be confident when you don't know who you really are? Do you know what I mean? Like, I just kind of go hand in hand. Would you see those changes like with your clients then, as they do start to, I suppose, like let go of things that aren't really them, maybe embrace themselves a bit more?
Yeah. There's more confidence and less of that. That's another phrase that Kieran Rose uses sometimes, is the double consciousness notion from race theory. The notion that you're sort of being someone and there's another part of you watching that someone to make sure you don't get it wrong, you know. So it frees up a lot of that, which is a great relief. It frees up energy. It's incredible the energy it frees up for people. It's all that extra energy that was going into that, or lots of it, doesn't have to go into it, and people have energy freed up. But then in some ways, the bit that's most exciting of all is, you know, when we were talking about masking and the consequences of it, one that I didn't really emphasize, because there's so many nasty things to talk about, so many negative things to talk about, one I didn't really emphasize was that people just aren't getting the rewards out of life that they should be getting, you know, by being themselves. You know, their real needs aren't being met. They're not spending enough time doing the things they really love and being the person they want to be. So you could say it's the presence of all the negative stuff, but it's also the absence of the positive. And a lot of that starts to come into people's lives. They're just enjoying life more and thinking, I just had a really interesting weekend doing things I like and with people I like, whereas I used to spend lots of my weekend forcing myself into situations where I didn't want to be with people I didn't want to be with. You know, what the hell was I at? I'm enjoying life way more, you know. So
that's so important, like to enjoy our lives, not just cope, Owen, not just. There's a couple of questions here. Will I call them out?
Yeah, I'll go for it. Yeah.
One about how do you work with people in regards to selective masking? For example, my authentic autistic self may not get hired at my dream job, or it may not be safe? Well, I mean, that's a really good question, because that's the whole issue of disclosure, you know, and how much you can be yourself in certain situations as well. So
And what was the second part of that? Read that again, because I didn't.
So how would you work with people in regard, like, so this is in regards to selective masking? So for example, this autistic person may not get hired for their dream job, or it may not be safe to be their authentic self at work, you know?
Yeah, no, I think in some ways it's all selective, you know. It just depends again on how lucky you are as to how much of it has to be selective or not. Yeah, and then in a way, none of us necessarily get to live a completely authentic life, you know, and all get our dream jobs or whatever. So, you know, we need to keep an eye still on safety. You know, that's an interesting way of looking at it, is to go back to those kind of notions around why people mask. They masked in order to feel safe. They masked in order to get love and validation. They masked in order to try and get some success. So what we're saying really is, let's just start from scratch around all of that. We still want you to feel safe, and we still want you to get some love and validation, if up to the point you can, and as much success as you can. But, you know, what you were doing wasn't working. It was the best you could do, and it makes sense that you did it. It didn't get you a lot of what you wanted. It may have helped you survive in some way. Maybe it would have been worse if you hadn't masked. But on the other hand, it's also unsustainable and you're burnt out, you know. But coming back to it, then we're saying, well, okay, what's better ways? There's not necessarily perfect ways. Plus, we're not starting from scratch in the chronological sense. We're not going back to when you were 10 and working forward again. Yeah. There's givens in your life now. You've got children, and you're halfway through a career or whatever. So given all of that, it has to be selective, and it has to be obviously the client's choice, and it is all about trade-offs and compromises and balances, but ones that are chosen much more than feel forced on you, except by just the realities that you can't make every choice in the world, and according to your priorities and in consultation with the people who really matter to you. But yeah, there's always some selectiveness to it, I think. And it's important to always give that message to clients, because you know, as I say, clients shouldn't feel under pressure to sort of, you know, drop everything suddenly that isn't them and force themselves into some sort of, you know, enforced autistic lifestyle. That's just as bad as any other sort of, you know, pressurized lifestyle.
And, you know, you mentioned perfection there, and I see, because like, and I know for many of us, because perfectionism is trauma response, and we've turned that perfectionism on ourselves. We can want the perfect life. We can want to be perfectly, authentically, 100% autistic, because that is also part of our masking and part of our, like, so it's so difficult to kind of navigate that, isn't it? And support people through that. But I think realizing that's what it is really important as well. There's another question here. I think it's when you were saying about, like, when people have learned networking and then they decide to use it or not. Does this feed goals of social skills trainings? Like, sometimes good to have the skill of masking versus sometimes good to have the skill to be the real self. Well, see, the thing is, social skills training is not social skills training. Social skills training is literally pretending that there's one way to communicate, and just teaching people that there's this one way to communicate that nobody actually communicates in, really. Nobody actually communicates the way social skills training teaches. Nobody stands this distance and does this thing and always responds with the right amount of empathy and always gives these social. Nobody communicates like that. So it's kind of fake anyway. So I think it's like, and when you teach people to kind of communicate in that way, and that's what research shows, it doesn't really work. It doesn't. We're still like rejected. We're still rejected, and we're rejected within milliseconds of people meeting us. So it doesn't matter what skills we have. It's something else, and that's prejudice. And I suppose when I get asked a question around social skills, it's like, but it doesn't matter, because we all know somebody can walk into a room and just go blah, 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 and it doesn't matter what's coming out of their mouth, because they're standing confidently, they believe in themselves, and everybody's like, whoa, did you hear what he said? You know? And nothing was said. Because, and it's confidence. It's your vibes that you're giving out. So if you concentrate on your confidence and how you feel about yourself,
being comfortable in yourself, yeah.
Everything else stems from that. That's what people respond to. That's what people see. And sometimes we don't, because we don't have that inside, you're just kind of projecting that out there. And that's how people work. That's why people are responding sometimes in that way to us. Do you know what I mean? It's because they can smell it off us, basically. The self-doubt. Yeah,
And in terms of, the question and the example of networking, I mean, first of all, I'd say there's a big difference between requiring children to learn social skills and talking to an adult who has learned a particular technique of networking and has now deciding what they want to do with it. I mean, they shouldn't be forced to learn it, and certainly not as children, but now they have it, so they're deciding what to do with it. But also, I would say, no matter what I say about it, it doesn't matter. It matters what the client says about it. The client says they want it, and that's it. But to make a more general point, and I think it ties in a little bit what you're saying, if the example I gave of networking is false. It's false for everybody. Do you know what I mean? So it's not supposed to be. Nobody says, let's all network because it's more real. They don't. They say, let's all network in order to get promotion and sales and things like that you network for, and likes on Facebook, So it's just like, do you want to play the game or do you not want to play the game? Do you know how to play the game and you want to play it? Well, then go and play it. But it's your choice now. This is the crucial thing, is choice. Let choice bring me back to a point that I think might be useful here. This is, I think, largely about prioritization. We don't have to look at everything in a client's life, and none of us need to look at everything in our life all in one go when we realize autistic, and when we realize how much we've been masking, and some of the ways we're masking won't even emerge in our minds until 6 months or a year have gone by or longer. But what we might need to do is pick some of the really serious issues where we're bending ourselves out of shape worst, and where we do have some choices. I mean, often the most obvious starting point is close relationships for most people. It's like, if I'm going to be real with anyone, more real, well then let it be my partner, my friends, my children, my parents, my whoever, and address those pieces. And work maybe can wait a little bit, or maybe not. There really isn't a rule when it comes to this. It's a question of what's priority, what's doable, what's a slightly easier win, what's absolutely urgent and essential, because we've got to figure this out now. It's become a bit of a time bomb in my marriage. I've got to look at it. We've got to decide where this leaves us. Maybe we need to do couples counseling and talk about, okay, who are the real us's, and so it really depends on the client and the priorities in their lives, and what's immediate, and what they feel ready for,
Yeah, prioritizing, because there can be that kind of, whoa, I'm find out now and I want to do everything and change everything, and actually that's a really good reminder.
Or should I change everything? Like there's a wonderful and proper enthusiasm growing these days in the autistic community about the kind of possible wonders of living a more authentic autistic life, but sometimes people can take that as a pressure, as in, oh, I ought to be like this person who's after all been 5 years already working on unmasking, and is very articulate in the way they write about it, and anyway has a different life than I have. And as you say, we can get perfectionist about that then and think, oh, I need to catch up, but no, there's no pressure. There shouldn't be pressure on this. There's been enough pressure in people's lives.
Yeah, and that's the hardest part for many of us, though, is to actually not put pressure on ourselves.
That's it.
It is. And there's so much you can do on your own as well, like that relationship with yourself. Like even when I remember thinking I was like, I don't stim, hanging around with all these autistic people. They're all talking about stimming. And I was like, I don't stim. Now I'm a failed autistic. And then I realized I totally do stim, of course. There's lots of things. But I also started to embrace it. And for me, it was actually in the car while I was driving, which is a stim anyway, because you're moving and you're processing. But putting on music and actually moving to that, and just kind of going, oh my God, I can actually move to music, because it's another relationship with music. It's like if you're not listening to the stuff that you like, you're kind of disconnecting from that rhythm as well, so for me that was something I really enjoyed doing, just kind of getting back in touch with stimming.
And that point is great, because I think it brings my mind back to what one of the key points, I think, for me, and it's good, maybe as we move towards a close. And that is that actually often, in many ways, the relationship that you need to often start with in terms of unmasking is your relationship with yourself. It's the stuff
Yeah.
we talked about earlier. It's not necessarily how other people see you or what your interactions are with them, or what things look in the outer world. It's like, what music do I actually like, and how do I feel about a whole lot of things and a whole lot of people in my life, and it's almost like, feeling your insides, touching yourself and thinking what's real, or rearranging the furniture inside yourself and throwing some of it out and keeping some of it and moving it around and buying a few new pieces, and then invite people in,
Yes.
so that, to me, that's key. That's really the missing piece sometimes, is people often think, even the term masking often suggests how you look to the outer world. An awful lot of this is more about what Kieran and Amy call identity misdevelopment and confusion and kind of inaccuracy, whatever you want to call that. In other words, a false picture of your own identity.
Well, that's it. And I think the conversations we have with ourselves, Eoin, when no one's listening, are the most important conversations. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That those inner voices, that critic, all of that, it's like, if we can work on that and go easier on ourselves, like, that's hugely important. There's a couple of questions there, because I know you have to go. What would be advice for a therapist to recognize not diagnosed yet and not revealed autism, for not to confuse it?
Well, they seem to be talking about maybe somebody who hasn't talked about being autistic, but maybe the therapist is wondering, are they autistic?
I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure what the question is. What would be advice for a therapist to recognize someone who's not diagnosed yet?
Yes.
That's probably what it is, and not revealed autism for not. Okay, so I think it's like broaching the subject, which is something we cover in the course as well. Is like, if you have a client who you think is autistic, how do you bring it up with them?
Yeah. Well, that brings me to the sort of type of closing points I was going to make, actually, and that is the point that I have a very detailed PowerPoint slide on exactly that topic of how you deal with whether you're wondering that a client might be autistic, and I present it on the course. So I'm afraid, if you want to see that slide, you need to come to the course. And I have other slides on unmasking as well, which I haven't revealed this evening. So that's the taster and trailer,
So. Bonus content.
Bonus content.
But
I won't respond to that one right now. It's another day's subject, but it is an important topic, and I always do talk about it when I'm training therapists. Is what do you do if that's in your head?
Absolutely. And how to go about it sensitively. Somebody's saying, seems to be an assumption of clients having these skills like networking already. What about times they don't have them and have identified they're struggling, want them? No, I think that was just like an example you gave of like someone might have, as in like,
that's
what you can take out of your life.
Lots of people, their masking might be just simply withdrawing and going very, very isolated and quiet, and that's again not their real self, because what they would like would be to be out meeting a few people who share their special interest and who they get on with. Do you know what I mean? So masking is the problem with the term masking, is that it suggests a little more of that outer effort, where really camouflaging, for instance, is the term that's used, and camouflaging is about making yourself invisible and not noticeable. So it's not so much about doing something, it's about trying to blend into the wallpaper, so it's all about distorted identity, it's all about just not really playing to your strengths, and instead borrowing other people's, and finding ways to survive that are very unfruitful for you. You see, it's complex. And I'm not mad about the term masking, even though we've used it all evening, because it is the common term, but there's a lot more to it.
Not this.
Do you know the movie The Mask with Jim Carrey? It's like that. The mask takes over, so it's just, you can't take it off, and it starts the mask lives you instead of you living the mask. That's more like it.
Well, I mean, it's trauma. It's in every fiber of our being. That's it. It's in ourselves. And I suppose what you've said tonight, and I love it, and I think it's obviously a difficult topic, but
can I just pick your question as well there before we finish this? Somebody says in the chat, they're saying, of course, I'm in DBT skills group. dialectical behavior therapy, isn't that just learning how to tone myself to meet the comfort of the external world? What about a radically open DBT? I've heard of that, but I'm not very familiar with it. Or should I just focus on the authentic self journey and the self accommodations will resolve themselves? Look, you know, we're talking about the real world here, if I understand the question correctly. You know, I don't see the unmasking process, and this is just me speaking as a therapist, I don't see it as some sort of, you know, radical openness. If people want radical openness, that's fine, I'll support them with that. But by and large, usually unmasking is a delicate process of trying to become more of your real self while learning to healthily protect yourself. The problem with masking is it's an unhealthy self-protection. There's nothing wrong with healthy self-protection. And if some dialectical behavior therapy skills help with healthy self-protection in difficult, challenging situations, then I think yeah, that's part of being alive. It's not, it's a choice, you know. So if I understand correctly, that's what I would say. So I think we're
out of time now. So
well, we've room for one more if you have one, but otherwise I think we'll wind it down. Yeah. A few people, by the way, really like the term stigma management, which, as I said, I got from Kieran Rose. So I can't take credit for that one. I think it's very good as well. Yeah. We're trying to reduce stigmatization without even calling it that, you know.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, there's a question here, it's quite long. Oh, so Marlene, yes, a good question. Owen, tell us more about full training.
Yes, well, good way to close. Thank you very much. I'm glad you asked me that. Yeah, I mean, basically the training is 10 days spread over various weekends over a number of months. You can find out more on the website. And you might want to add other practicalities. In terms of course content, it's roughly divided between you know, general learning about what it is to be an autistic person compared to what the, you know, myths that are out there, and a lot of the interesting things that go with being autistic, so that you get a much better idea of what it actually means to be an autistic person. Between that on the one hand, and then specifically addressing the kind of questions we've been talking about this evening, which is, you know, unmasking being one of them. What do we do as therapists when we meet a client who is saying they are autistic or think they're autistic? So it's roughly divided about half and half between those two things, more general information and learning and exploration, and more specific therapy focused. And yeah, well, you know, the therapy piece I talk about, the therapy of masking and unmasking, but also a whole variety of other things, including the question that was asked earlier, if it's on your mind but the client's not mentioning it, and you know, all sorts of pieces around, you know, again, working with things like, for instance, I'll give you one example, working with social anxiety with an autistic person, because being socially anxious is not part of being autistic, but it goes very commonly with being autistic. And some of the work we can do with it is similar to the work we would do with anybody, but there's some interesting tweaks. And again, these are the bits you need to come on the course to get, you know. As far as we can tell so far, there are some important little differences that we need to keep in mind in terms of, for instance, the goals of social anxiety work. We're not trying to help a client to become socially normal and, you know, live a template of a social life, you know, neuronormative one. And so, you know, there are important things to take into account in terms of therapy. And also we look at things like a few of the different therapy approaches. And, you know, there's no reason to think any one is worse or better, but what are maybe some of the tweaks, again, we might be thinking we might need to make for an autistic client. This is all early days, by the way. It's a big learning curve for everybody. We're all on a big learning curve around all of this.
Absolutely. And I think one thing about the course as well, which kind of comes as a surprise, is that many of the participants are also neurodivergent. So it kind of we've got some really great discussions there. And I think just to finish up by saying that, like, none of us are just autistic, you know, that we have lots of other identities, lots of other intersectionalities. And I suppose that's something that we cover on the course. And not, you know, we touch on it, needs more to be, we need to delve into it more. But that's, you know, when you're unmasking, you know, as a woman, it's going to be different to unmasking. And then, you know what I mean, depending on all your different things that have gone on in your life. So yeah,
single in a relationship, parent, not parent,
you know, autistic,
employed, unemployed, you know, millions of things. Yeah,
autistic and queer, questioning your sexuality. There's a whole load of stuff all wrapped up in it, which obviously we haven't even touched on tonight, but we do in the course. So Eoin, I just want to say a huge thank you to coming along tonight. It's been a really good discussion.
Great. Yeah, always good.
Always a pleasure. You need to scoot off because Yeah, so you need to
That's
go
great.
on.
I'll head and leave you to it, and maybe we see some people on the course even. All
Yeah,
right, great.
cheers,
Okay, take
Owen.
care.
Good to
See ya.
you.
Bye bye.
Talk to you soon. Thanks everybody else for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. And you know, if you have any questions, pop us an email. We can or you can book in for a consultation with me if you have any questions about the course. We would love to see more people on it. It's our third time running it. I think it's half full now at this stage. We're starting in October, and the feedback we've got from people who've taken the course has been phenomenal. But also not that, it's the fact that now we have people who are able to support our community, the adults in our community, you know, and have, I suppose, a neuroaffirming approach and have those insights. And that's really important to us and all the work that we do here at Awesome. So thank you so much for coming along. Thanks everybody. Cheers. Good night. Thanks.